Chavre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Vayeira, Yutes Cheshvan, and tomorrow is Chof Cheshvan, Shabbos, the Yom Holedes of the Rebbe Rashab in Tov Reish Chof Aleph, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe who founded Tomchei Tmimim, the Lubavitcher Yeshivas network. Today is the Yortzeit of one of my most important mentors, Mashpiyim, and that is Rebbe Elimelech Tzibul. He was a famous Mashpiyah, spiritual guidance counselor in the Morristown Yeshiva of Tomchei Tmimim. So today's his Yortzeit. I want to dedicate today's shir in his honor. So Rebbe Elimelech Rebbe Tzvi Yaakov should have an Aliyas HaNeshama. Uizbet Nals Guts for ganz Klal Yisrael from the Mishpacha Befrat. So today we're going to speak about the connection between all these things: Vayeira, the Rebbe Rashab, Tomchei Tmimim, and my dear Mashpia. But first, as usual, we'll start with a prayer. Right now, our brothers, our sons, our daughters, our children, our family is in Gaza, and we're fighting a war. So we have to add. So until the war is over, we're going to add tzedakah to our regular routine shir on Friday. Thought for the week. First, we'll start with tefillah. Ono Adonai, Hoshiyano. Ono Adonai, Hatzlichano. So I had in mind that we should win the war swiftly, and we should be successful in rescuing all the hostages, and there shouldn't be even one casualty. Now we're going to give tzedakah in honor of the situation, so that it should all be worked good. Now let's talk some words of Torah. As we've spoken many times, it's amazing how when you look into Torah, you see the messages, you see guidance for what the situation is that we're going through right now. And we spoke about it in the last couple of weeks. In this week's Parsha, there's something so amazing. The very, very core of the issue right now in the war is the subject we're going to talk about today, and that is a Maimar Azal, which says, Kol hamerachim al echzorim, whoever has mercy on cruel ones, soifoi shemis achzor al rachmonim. In the end, he becomes cruel over merciful ones. And that's the issue right now with the world opinion talking about ceasefire and that we should have mercy on the civilians of Gaza. Guess what? The Torah teaches us this week the very stark contrast between different types of kindness and what is the Jewish perspective concerning kindness. And this is the very story in this week's Parsha which touches upon it. But first, we'll say that it seems to me that the central theme of this week's Parsha is Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, which means selflessness. In the beginning of the Parsha, we see that God appeared to Avram Avinu, Hashem appears to Avram Avinu. Everyone knows the famous story, which is repeated many times in the talks of the Rebbe, that the Rebbe Rashab was 5 years old, and he asked, how come Hashem never appeared to me? And the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandfather, answered, when a Jew is 99 years old, decides to circumcise himself, so then he's worthy of God's revelation, that he should appear to him. So again, that a 99-year-old should circumcise himself is selflessness. Then comes the idea of chesed, kindness. And this is the epitome, the idea of kindness that in this week's Parsha, even though last week we spoke about the kindness involved in the war, but traditionally, and in the Maimar Azal, the focus is on this week's story about how Hashem is in conversation with Avram, and Avram notices the guests. Who comes first? The guests are Hashem. The guests. Why? Because that's what Hashem wants. But what's the point? When it comes to your being intimate and one with Hashem, in the revealed way, in Giluyim, so you're reaching levels of spiritual heights, is selfish. It's your spiritual heights. It's making you feel good. You're basking in the glory of the Lord. But running and bothering yourself to deal with guests, sometimes you're not in the mood, sometimes it's hard, and especially in this case where Avram was in the height of pain because of the circumcision. And this is the whole wonder of the story. Hashem made it very hot that the sun should come out so that Avram shouldn't have to bother with guests. Little it turned out to be that Avram was more bothered by the fact that he couldn't exercise his kindness trait, his kindness muscle, and that was more pain for him than the fact that he was suffering from the circumcision. So again, the point is, Avram represents the ultimate picture of kindness, as it's spoken about in Orchos Tzadikim, and we've spoken about this many times. Avram was the epitome, Nodiv begufoi, Nodiv benafshei, Nodiv b'mamoinoi. In brief, Nodiv begufoi meant that he bothered himself physically. Sometimes you have a rich person and he has butlers, he has maids. They cut up the meat, they carry the plate, they clean up afterwards. No, by Avram we says he came to the door, he was the porter, he took your suitcases, he ran up the stairs, he sweat physically to exercise his kindness. That means he was a Nodiv begufoi, he was generous with his body. Nodiv benafshei, sometimes a person is a very great intellectual, likes to be to himself, doesn't spend time with the lower class people, and they're not his level. It's very difficult. It's one thing to give a person a plate of scrambled eggs and do kindness, but then to actually engage in conversation and have patience and tolerance, call it whatever you want, and to actually love the lower class, so to speak. And over here, the word is that he sat down, he talked philosophy, he talked spirituality, he spoke mysticism, monotheism to construction workers, and sheshtachvu la'avak ba'afar ragleim, as it's explained, it meant to people that were inferior, so to speak. They bow down to the dust on their feet. There's a level of feet, there's a level of dust on the feet, and there's people that bow down to the dust on the feet. And Avram, meaning to say, the concept, the metaphor is, these people were connected to the lowest, like in physicality, mentality. And Avram sitting over there, fabringing with them, not the benafshe, he's giving up with his time to spend time and to talk philosophy, godliness, spirituality with these people. So not the begufay, not the benafshe, and not the b'mamoinoi. Some people, they're not great. They don't have broad-mindedness. They give a small check. But there's others that think big. They give a big check. They just give and give. You see by the Rebbe by dollars, by the way. The Rebbe is always... It's amazing to watch videos how someone says, can I have, when the Rebbe gives dollars, so grandmother says, can I have dollars for my grandchildren? The Rebbe says, how many? She says 20. The Rebbe gives 20. One guy comes and says, can I have dollars for the whole, my whole floor in the hospital, medical staff, or the whole hospital? How many? 100. The Rebbe starts giving. The Rebbe is a giver. Anyways, so, again, what's kindness? True kindness. And this is the point. True kindness. And this is what we're speaking about by Avram Avinu, has to come from humility, and it's all about the other. Okay? So now we have Mesiras Nefesh in the first words of the Parsha, selflessness. Vayeira Hashem, because he circumcised himself. Then we have the story of his kindness, which means it's about the other. Not only sympathy, but empathy. A lot of these concepts we spoke about before, so we're not going to go into it at length. Then, later in the Parsha comes the ultimate of self-sacrifice, which is the story of the Akedah, which we spoke already about once before. But today, I want to talk about the crux of the issue, the story in this week's Parsha of the 9th test. And what's the 9th test? The 9th test is that Avram had a son called Yishmael, and Sarah told Avraham that he has to banish Yishmael from their home. Now, there's not a talk about parenting. This is a talk about Yishmael, and this is a talk about what the lessons that we're supposed to take about it. and how it is relevant to the current situation as we speak. So what's the story? It's called the 9th test. The 10th test, which is the Akedah, is a greater test, obviously. But first let's talk about why this test is the 9th test. That means in level of degree, of hardship, of challenge, only the Akedah, which really truthfully is incomparable, unparalleled, but still this test, the 9th test, was greater than all the previous 8. And the answer is because this was home. We say sometimes that a person has challenges mi bayis u mi bachutz, mi bifnim u mi bachutz. This test was a test mi bifnim. Nothing hit home, nothing was as painful, nothing was as disturbing as this story that happened until the Akedah. But until the story of the 9th test, nothing really was such a challenge to Avram like this test. And over here, not like the other tests, over here the Pasuk explicitly said that Avram had a problem with it, as we'll soon see. So, Sarah gives birth to Yitzchak. Sarah sees that Yishmael is a problem, and we'll soon see how the problem is, what the problem is. But when Sarah tells Avram that he has to expel Yishmael, just I want to bring out the point. It says, Vayeira Adova ma'od be'einei Avram. The matter greatly distressed Avram. It doesn't say Stam, Vayeira Adova, which would be interesting enough, would show how challenging it was for Avram. But it says, Vayeira Adova ma'od. Ma'od means exceedingly. So we see that this was a very, very hard test. Sarah told Avram, you have to banish Yishmael. Okay, what's the reason? Because before that, the pasuk says, Vayeira Sarah, and Sarah saw that Yishmael was mitzachik. The little translation of mitzachik is mocking. Rashi says, Lashon Avodah Zarah, Lashon Gilui Arayos, and Lashon Retzicha. So Rashi brings down that this word, mitzachik, could be interpreted as the 3 cardinal sins of idolatry, immorality in relations, and murder. And actually, as Rashi brings down, she saw how Yishmael had arrows pointed at Yitzchak. So this is the point. First, let's talk about what it says simple, and then we'll go to what Chassidus says. So the simple story over here is, Avram has a child from Hagar, brought up in his home, and he gives him a certain chinuch, a certain education, and this child is rejecting. He represents everything which is the polar opposite. Not selflessness, but selfish. Gilui Arayos means no morality when it comes to relations, no loyalty, just hefke petichke, you do what you want. And the same thing as idolatry, you're not sticking to one God. And then murder. You murder because you're more important than the other person. And like Rashi also brings down, he didn't want that Yitzchak should get the inheritance. So there's one point over here that it was a matter of sakonis nefashos. Sarah knew that Yitzchak was the one who was going to be Yerush, and as the pasuk says right over here, when Avram was distressed and disturbed by this, Hashem tells him that Ki Yitzchak yikar l'chazara. Yitzchak is the one. Yitzchak is the one who's going to carry on the values, the virtues, the principles, and everything you stand for, the Jewish nation. So number one, it was a question of security and defense. Sakonis nefashos. Yishmael had the arrow pointed at Yitzchak, number one. Number two, it's about chinuch. The Rebbe brings out in other places that Yitzchak's chinuch was threatened by Yishmael. Avram couldn't have Yishmael in the house, who was crushing and destroying and decimating the entire culture of the home. And therefore it was a sakona, it was a threat to Yitzchak, begashmis, as we said before, but it was also a threat, beruchnis. And the message is, Don't dilute the chinuch. You have to go with the chinuch 100%. And if you feel there's a threat to it, then you have to get rid of that threat. Okay. Now, according to Chassidus, and this is connecting it now with how we started the shir about having kindness, what's the right kindness. So therefore, let's go back to this case. So it was the 9th test, yes? And why was it the 9th test? Because it was close to home. And what did Avram Avinu have to exercise? Similar, but in a much smaller form, in a much less degree. Like we explained concerning the Akedah, that what makes the Akedah the greatest test, according to some commentators, because Avram had to exercise Gvura, the most kindest person in the world was asked to slaughter his son and to slit his son's throat. So therefore, Chassidus explains that this test wasn't in the mode of his regular disposition and temperament and characteristic, which was kindness. Avram represented the epitome of kindness. Chesed Atzilus. He was the personification of kindness. And here Hashem asked him to do something which is seemingly the most cruel thing to do. It would be difficult for a regular person to kill his own child. All the more so Avram Avinu. Okay, that's the Akedah. But now, in a miniature form, was a similar thing. Yishmael is Avram's son. And the Eibishter is telling him, and that's why he had difficulties doing it. It's his own flesh and blood. Sarah is taking out the mother, it's Hagar, but it's still his own son. And it's in his home. And it's in his Dalet Amis. It's not close to home, it is home. And what does he have to do now? He has to exercise Gvura, a sense of banishment, a sense of expulsion, a sense of expelling, the opposite of kindness. So therefore, this was the 9th test, because it was so difficult for him. And here we come back to this expression of Kol Hamerachim Alachzorim Sofer Shemes Achzal Achmonim. If, in this case, he wouldn't have exercised this Gvura, he would have said, I have to be merciful, then only negative would have came out of it. Rachman al-Fan, sorrow was the one who was mechaven, because who knows what could have happened to Yitzchak. It would have ended up being a situation, Shemes Achzar al-Achmonim. Yitzchak, who was the tzaddik, Yitzchak, who represented what was right, what was just, would have been hurt. And who knows how much so. Okay, now let's go to how Chassidus explains it, and we'll take this concept of correct kindness, correct benevolence, proper generosity, or twisted generosity, perverted generosity, warped kindness. And this is really very much connected to the progressive woke, etc. I don't want to get into examples right now. I'm a teacher of Chassidus, but ten l'chochem v'yechem beit. So we'll start, and I think I once studied this once in Shir, with Igeres HaKodesh, Siman Beis. One of the most famous Igeres HaKodesh, it's called Kotointi. This was a letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote after the story of V'teskista, where he asked his Chassidim not to gloat at the ones who were their opposition before, but to take the kindness that Hashem bestowed upon them, that the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, in a humble manner. And in this Igeres HaKodesh, he brings the contrast between Chesed of Yishmael and Chesed of Avram. First, I want to say that some genesis of what I'm speaking today is found in the Sikha of Likutei Sichas Chelik Chafei, Pashas Vayeira. Over there, the Rebbe gets into this concept of 2 times of kindness. See there. But I'm going to read it to you from Tanya. So the Alter Rebbe says like this. He speaks about that he's so humbled that he was released from prison. And he said that this is B'chinas Yemin Shebegdusha, the Chesed LaAvram. This is the kindness to Avram. Sha'omar Anochi Ofer Ve'efer. And he said, I am but dust and ashes, which reflects Avram's humility. And then he goes on to say this is Yaakov's trait. And then he brings out Masha'en Kain Bizelu Mazeh. When we talk about the other side, Who Yishmael? This is Yishmael, Chesed the Klippa, the Chesed of Klippa. So even though in this story itself, that we just discussed, that Avram banishes Yishmael, but really in essence, what is going on over here? This is the story of Avram is Chesed of Kedusha, kindness of holiness, which means it comes out of humility, which means it's not about you, which means there's a higher authority. And therefore it means that you're not bound by it according to your nature, that you're kind, but it's connected to a higher authority, which is really humility, because it's not about you. And therefore, if you know that the Kavanah Yena, the real purpose right now, is to exercise a bit of Gvura, banishing the son, then you'll be able to do it, because it wasn't about you in the first place. You do have a kind nature, and that's beautiful. But you're not limited by a kind nature. You have true kindness, which has to include sometimes an element of discipline, as we'll soon see. And that's the contrast between Chesed of Avram and Chesed of Yishmael. Yes, Yishmael is Avram's son, and therefore there's the Chesed. But because by Yishmael it's connected to his nature and his ego, therefore in the end it's going to be twisted. Therefore they can never transcend themselves, and therefore if it's a question of Yishmael or Yitzchak, because Yitzchak might inherit, so therefore I have to kill Yitzchak, because it was never really about something greater than you. You're still stuck on yourself. So you'll have generosity when you decide to be generous, or you can end up doing something the most warped and twisted and still think it's generous, but you're the one who's the arbitrator. You decide, not some greater, higher authority. So really it doesn't come from humility. Let's look inside. Mashenkin bezelu mazehu yishmol chesed the klippe kol shach chesed godel, the greater kindness that's bestowed upon him, hu hoilich v'godel begoive v'gasas ruach v'reichev libay. The more kindness is bestowed to him, the greater success he has. He becomes bigger by himself. His ego becomes enlarged. And that's the opposite. By a Jew, the more kindness is bestowed to him, the more success he has in life, the more humble he has. Like he brings before the word, kol ha-kodav yoser, yoser kala. We've spoken about this subject many times. I don't want to elaborate. This is really the Rashi, where Rashi says later on in Chumash Devarim, Atem ha'ma'at mikol ha'amim. And Rashi says of we are the humble ones, not that we're a minority, that's why God chose us. We're the most humble ones, that's why Hashem chose us. And then he brings a Rashi over there, Loik in Nebuchadnezzar, by some of the Gentiles, the greater success, the more the ego become enlarged. In direct measure of the success, I'm the best. In the more measure of the success, the greater becomes the ego. And by the Jewish people, it's the opposite way around. The more success, the more humility. But that's about kindness that's bestowed upon you. You're the recipient. But now we're talking also about being the giver. Same idea. In Judaism, we say when you have kindness, it's because you look at yourself, and the Rebbe speaks about in the Sikha over there, Masa Matzma Kisherayim. There's a Maimon Azal. You look at yourself as you're undeserving. And in general, I'm just a trustee. Ten loy mishaloi. I'm giving the Eibishter from what's his in the first place. And I think to myself, why did the Eibishter make me a multimillionaire? Because he trusts me to dispense of it properly. And I only should take what I need, and the rest I should give away. That's one attitude. That's when you're masamatzmei kisherayim, when you're humbled. But then you have another attitude. You know why I'm successful? Because I'm a smart cookie. Because I'm a businessman. I'm a chevra man. And the more money I have, my ego gets bigger. I'm a big man. Yes, you're generous. But when you're generous, it comes out of the sense that you're greater, you're bigger, you're more important. And therefore you give to ones that are lower than you. I was once talking to somebody. I was pretty shocked because he was talking about an institution, a Moisid, and how he is going to help. And he says, there's no one else who could do it. There's no one else who's on the horizon, that's rich, that's, like he was thinking to himself that it's him. And then he lost his money. Hashem Yirachem. The Rebbe should up to every single Yid should have kol tov sela, but you have to be very careful not to let it go to your head. That's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is that the more money you have, the more humbled you are. It should even pain you that you're the one that has to be the giver and he has to be the recipient. You should daven to the Eibishter as you have your millions and millions, that you should make it that the other person should also have millions. And the same thing is true in someone who's rich in knowledge. Sometimes a person is rich in knowledge, when anybody asks them a question, they make the other person feel bad that they're asking them a question. And they go, that I have to spend time talking to the person to share with the knowledge. Instead of davening to Hashem, there should come a day where everyone will know you, everyone will be a Talmid Chacham, everyone will have the knowledge. So in the Jewish view, the Jewish perspective, the more you have to give, and the more that it was given to you, the more humbled you are. And you're humbled in how you give. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful when you hear stories of people that are Balei Tzedakah, Balei Chesed. Right now in Israel and the whole Jewish world, we see these stories of Chesed, and I'm always so touched when you see how we're ready to give of ourselves, selflessness, and care for the other, and go to the lengths that were unimaginable just to help another person. So now, let's connect it first to Temchi Temimim, selflessness, Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe Rashab said that the whole point of the Temchi Temimim was, he says, to make a time, I can't elaborate now because the video is already late, but he said that he wants that the Temimim should be like soldiers. And he says, David, get which means we all have to be soldiers right now, my friends. There are soldiers that are going into Gaza, and the Rebbe should protect them, every single one of them right now, and we should be able to get out of there and should be mission accomplished. But right now they're there, and right now every single one of us has to be soldiers. And what does it mean to be soldiers? Selflessness. They're being soldiers and they're selfless with the physical body. We have to be selfless. Not the begufay, not the benafshay, not the b'moinay, as we see by Avram Avinu. And what does it mean? Kol ha'yetzel mechemes beis David, koisav get kisses leishtay, drop everything. This thing, when the war broke out, over 300,000 reservists came from all corners of Eretz Yisrael to join up. Wow! Look at that. At the snap of a finger, of a moment's notice, they dropped everything and they were in warrior mode, ready to give up their life. That's selflessness. And that's Temchi Temimim. The whole training of Temchi Temimim. You're a graduate of Temchi Temimim. You're a graduate of Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Commandos, Marines. And what does that mean? Every single person of Temchi Temimim Lubavitch, the training is to be communal conscience. There's a higher authority. There's a greater being. Give yourself up to it. And the same thing concerning Melech. I want to say one thing. I've spoken about it many, many times. His nature was more being to himself. I know maybe some other people talk of him when he was older, and it's a different experience. But from my experience and my friend's experience, he had the nature of an intellectual. And moichin is la'atzmai. The more intellectual usually a person is, the more he's to himself, a bit aloof, and a bit cold. Not as a chasarn, just the nature. But when he would say l'chaim, and fabring with the bachram, I cannot tell you how his true beauty and love came out. And maybe it had to do with his personality, psychologically speaking, that he was a very private person. A very private person is uncomfortable. Shedding their inhibitions, letting it all out, doesn't come natural. And especially, he was just so edel. He was a very refined, unassuming person. I don't have words to tell you. He was an elevated Jew. He was so special. I consider him one of the greatest chassidim of the last 50 years. And there's so much to talk about him. In any case, when he said l'chaim, by chassidish farbringens, with the bachram, he went out of himself more than any other mashpia. With the beauty, a chassidish varmkeit, a holy varmkeit. He got up on the tables. He hugged Bachrim. He made freilach. He sang songs. Unbelievable. He sang songs. He went into a circle. He made somersaults. It was an unbridled love which was projected and radiated from him. I don't know of any other mashpia who his farbrengen was in that style. He ended off the farbrengens in such a way that there was a climax of joy. Most of the mashpia, when they farbrengen, they go to a certain point and the car runs out of gas, it stops. It could go a whole night, but that's what happens usually at the end. He was the only one. I can't think of any other mashpia. When he farbrengen, it ended off on this spiritual high in the heights of joy and happiness. And you'd think such a personality, if you saw him on a regular Tuesday afternoon, it would be the opposite. But this is called Mesiras Nefesh. This is the beauty of Yiddishkeit. This is the beauty of Chassidus. How a person can go out of his nature. He says L'chaim, but the true beauty comes out, the purity of his soul, of his neshama, that he transcends his nature. Like Avram transcends his nature, the Mesiras Nefesh, that if you have to exercise a gvura to banish, you have to do that. If for Reb Melech it meant to reach out and embrace and hug and just shine with love to everyone in his Dalet Amis, he would do that. And the lesson in general today is very much so, and I don't want to elaborate. It's about these social justice warriors who sometimes can care more for trees and frogs and whales and chickens, and they don't know what it means to really be attentive for 5 minutes to the person, the human being that's standing in front of you. And so on and so forth. Right now, talking about what's going on with Israel, those people that are talking about ceasefire, and those two people that are talking about having mercy, those people are actually exactly the point where there's a Yishmael who's ready to kill a Yitzchak, and we say, but he's only a lad. But we have to realize exactly the Maimon Azalu said before, Kol HaMerachim Al Zayrim, that means it's coming from your nature, which means it's not really true goodness, it's not really true kindness. And in the end, therefore, Soifei Shemis Achzal Rachmanim. And therefore, the best way forward always in life is to remember there's a Das Torah. Speak to your Aseh L'charav. Look into Shulchan Aruch. Then you'll come to the Chesed ve'emes. Oilam Chesed Yibona. The Eibishter is Kulei Rachmim. The Eibishter is Kulei Chesed. And the Torah, which is the Torah came down, Lasei Shalom Ba'olam. It tells us that even in such a situation, that sometimes an Avram has to banish Yishmael. And this was the 9th test. The Eibishter said help that we should be strong with our emunah in the Eibishter. And the Eibishter should make it to be like it says in the Posik, Haishio esamecho b'toiv anir v'anigla b'gula mitzvah shlema. And the schus from the Baal Yemai letters, the Rebbe Rashab, should be pale Yeshus b'kerev ha'oretz ha'dial yidin was dafen geholfen werden. And was for the Indian soll not sein. Any Jew that has to be helped in whatever area of his life that he has to be helped, and Bnei Chaim Mezoni should be helped right now in the merit of the Rebbe Rashab. Begula mitzvah shlema, take it from a yad, mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarich, your man in Melbourne.